If you want to understand why the cost of your groceries is rising, why the electronics you ordered are stuck in transit for weeks, or why the entire North American logistics network feels like it is on the brink of a total systemic collapse, you don't need to look at Washington, and you don't need to look at Wall Street. You need to look at the dirt and steel in Chicago, Illinois. Chicago is not just a city. It is the physical bottleneck of the entire United States. It is the single most critical choke point in the North American economy. Every single day, thousands of tons of cargo, everything from fuel, grain, and timber to microchips, automotive components, and consumer goods, funnels through this one metropolitan area. But this massive volume of trade is colliding with a century-old infrastructure reality that is violent, chaotic, and dangerously inefficient. We are currently witnessing a massive $4.6 billion gamble to save the American supply chain. This is the story of the CREATE program. It is the largest urban rail infrastructure project in American history. It is a desperate attempt to untangle a knot of 19th century geography that is strangling 21st century commerce. And if this project fails, the ripple effect will be felt in every household from Los Angeles to New York. Why Chicago? To understand the current crisis, we have to look at a geographic accident that occurred in the 19th century. When the United States expanded westward, Chicago became the natural interface between the massive, resource-rich Great Plains and the industrial hubs of the East Coast. Every major railroad company wanted to be here. By the year 1900, Chicago was the undisputed rail capital of the world. But that success created a permanent structural trap. Fast forward to 2026. That 19th century decision has created a 21st century nightmare. Chicago is where 6 of the nation's 7 Class 1 railroads, the heavy hitters that move the vast majority of American freight, intersect. On top of that, it's the point where 6 major interstate highways, including the I-80, I-90, and I-55, converge. This isn't just busy. This is a logistical collision. The core problem is simple. The railroads were built for a different era. The tracks are owned by different private companies that operate in silos. A train coming from the West Coast carrying electronics has to hand off to a different railroad in Chicago to get to the East Coast. But there is no seamless, automated system for this. Trains have to literally stop, decouple, and physically switch tracks across city streets. This is the Chicago Shuffle. Every time a train has to stop, wait for a signal, or cross another rail line, it creates a delay. And in the world of just-in-time logistics, a delay in Chicago doesn't just stay in Chicago. To understand the ground reality, you have to realize that rail logistics in Chicago is not a smooth liquid flow. It is a series of forced bottlenecks. There are over 70 grade crossings in the Chicago region, where road traffic and rail traffic physically compete for space. These crossings cause hours of congestion, not just for commuters, but for the freight itself. When a mile-long freight train, which is a massive, heavy, slow-moving object, needs to cross a junction, it blocks every other track and road it intersects. This creates a domino effect. If one train is delayed, it holds up the junction. If the junction is held up, the next train cannot pass. In a single day, dozens of trains can be trapped in a gridlock across the Chicago terminal area. This is where the math gets brutal. According to the Association of American Railroads, an average train moving through Chicago spends 15 to 20% of its transit time simply waiting. They are not moving. They are waiting for other trains, waiting for signals, or waiting for clearance. That represents billions of dollars in fuel costs, labor costs, and lost productivity every year. And then there is the interchange problem. Most of the cargo moving through Chicago is intermodal, meaning it is in standardized shipping containers. To move a container from a western rail line to an eastern one, it often has to be loaded onto a truck. driven through the city traffic from one rail yard to another, and reloaded onto a new train. This creates thousands of truck movements per day on Chicago's already congested highway system. This is the hidden cost of the Chicago choke point. The pollution, the road wear, and the sheer logistical insanity of moving goods through an urban sprawl that was never meant to handle this level of industrial traffic. To fix this, the industry and the government launched the CREATE program, the Chicago Region Environmental and Transportation Efficiency Program. It is a massive, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure initiative designed to untangle the knot. The $4.6 billion goal is to build flyovers, massive rail overpasses that allow freight trains to bypass other tracks or road traffic. It sounds simple, but engineering a multi-ton, mile-long freight train to ascend an overpass is an immense challenge of physics and civil engineering. We are talking about building bridges that can support thousands of tons of steel and cargo, weaving them through a dense urban environment that wasn't designed for them. The CREATE program targets specific junctions. By building a flyover, you take a train that used to have to wait for a clear signal at a junction, and you give it a dedicated path. You remove the shuffle. You remove the wait. The project involves 70-plus individual components. Some are small, just track upgrades or signal synchronization. Others are massive. The Englewood flyover, for instance, which cost hundreds of millions and removed a critical conflict point between multiple major rail lines. But why is it taking so long? Why is it costing so much? Because you are trying to perform open-heart surgery on a living patient. You cannot shut down the U.S. rail network for a month to build a bridge. Every single piece of construction must happen while the trains continue to roll. It requires a level of planning, coordination, and precision that is essentially unmatched in the history of American civil engineering. Why should you care if a train is stuck in a rail yard in Chicago? Because the American supply chain is a just-in-time system. Corporations keep their inventory as low as possible to save costs. They don't have massive warehouses full of backup goods anymore. They rely on the certainty that a train will arrive on a specific day. When a train carrying shipping containers is delayed by 48 hours in Chicago because it couldn't find a slot to cross a junction, the warehouse in New Jersey runs out of stock. The retail shelf stays empty. The automotive plant in Ohio stops the assembly line because the specific microchip delivered via rail didn't show up on time. But it goes deeper. When rail is slow, shippers switch to trucks. When they switch to trucks, highway congestion skyrockets, driving up diesel costs, increasing the cost of goods, and increasing the wear and tear on the interstate system, which is already struggling to keep pace. The bottleneck in Chicago effectively acts as a throttle on the entire U.S. economy. When the bottleneck tightens, prices go up. When it loosens, the whole system breathes easier. Every single consumer in America is currently paying a Chicago tax on their goods, built into the price to cover the inefficiencies of moving things through the middle of the country. As of 2026, the CREATE program is hitting its stride, but the demand is growing faster than the construction. The rise of automation, the constant need for faster e-commerce, and the massive shift in global trade routes mean that Chicago is busier than it has ever been in its history. We are seeing new challenges: the need for massive electrification of the rail yards, the integration of AI-driven signal control systems, and the daunting cost of land acquisition in a built-out city. The $4.6 billion investment is not a solution in the permanent sense. It is a critical modernization. It is an attempt to force a century-old network to behave like a modern digital-era system. If it succeeds, Chicago remains the most efficient hub in the world. If it fails, or if we underinvest, the United States will face a permanent, escalating logistical tax on every single good that moves across the country. The American economy is currently being held together by ribbons of steel and a massive multi-billion-dollar engineering project in the middle of a Midwestern city. Chicago isn't just a place on the map. It's the gears that keep the engine running. And right now, those gears are under more pressure than ever before. We have learned that infrastructure is not just concrete and steel. It is the invisible force that determines the stability of our entire way of life. And for the next decade, all eyes in the logistics world are fixed on Chicago. Because where Chicago goes, the American economy follows.